Okay, this is page 68, problem number 14. It says you're considering two mutual funds for investment. The possible returns for the fund are dependent on the state of the economy and given below. So fund number one, if it's a good economy, 20% is possible. Fair economy, 10%, poor, -10, and then 40, 20, and -40 for the fund number two. You believe the probability is 20% that the economy will be good, 50% that it'll be fair, and 30% that it'll be poor. So those are probabilities. Remember, expected return is a return times the probability of that return. Okay, and then you can figure out the variance and the standard deviation based on those. But remember, again, an expected return is an average, and it's based on a return, which is the possible return here, times the probability of those returns. So what I did was I drew an extra column right here and just drew the put the probabilities in right next to another column, because you're going to need to be multiplying these times those anyway. And remember, in one of your sample problems in the workbook, he had like 20% and 50%, then a question mark down for the third probability. Well, remember, the probabilities have to add up to 1. So if he's got 20% and 50% and a question mark here, and there's only one more, it has to be 30%, right? So it has to add up to 1. Okay, so it says find the expected value and the expected value, expected return, same thing, and the standard deviations for the returns for Fund 1. Find the expected value and standard deviation of returns for Fund 2, and then which funds will you pick. So basically they give you those formulas, I think on page 64 of your workbook. Let's back this up. Okay, and here's those formulas. Expected return is the sum of the returns, basically this return times the probability of that return. Okay, so all you do is take whatever return they've told you, multiply it times the probability, and that's the expected return. Once you've got that, you find the variance of the return. The variance, remember, equals the standard deviation squared. Basically, you're just taking the sum of the returns minus the expected return squared times the probability. And that's the variance times the probability. So in the first one, it's just the return times the probability. The second time, it's for the variance, it's just the variance times the probability. And remember, for the standard deviation, you're just taking the square root of the variance. So again, the expected return, you just take whatever return they say this is possible, multiply it times the probability. That will give you the expected return, which is the return times the probability. For the variance, all you're doing is taking a variance, which is, this is like the return they're talking about minus the expected return. Remember, which is the average, which is mu. This is just how you figure out variance normally. It's x minus mu, or whatever it is, squared. It's the possible return minus the mu, which is the expected return. You square that. That gives you the variance, but times the probability again. And then the standard deviation is just the square root of the variance. Remember, the variance is standard deviation is squared. So you take the square root. It's the square root of the variance. Okay, so you go through the calculations for fund number one. Let me do this real quick. Okay, so fund number one. So for the expected return, you take what they say is possible, which is 20%, times the probability, which is also 20%. Now you got to add that, because this is the expected return for the whole fund. 10% times 50%. And this is a negative, so you got to minus this. Make sure you keep this stuff clear, what's negative, because you'll be subtracting that. So minus 10% times 30%. 10 times 30. That gives you a 6% expected return. So that's your expected return, 6%. Now remember, the variance is you take each one of those, which is the x minus mu squared times, and then you multiply times the probability. So this is 20% minus 6%, which is, remember, the expected return is the average, which is mu. Okay, so 20% minus 6% squared, so that's 14 squared in that case, times 0.2 plus 10 minus 6 squared times 0.5, which is the probability, plus, and then put this in brackets, and this is real important because I screwed up on this, make that a minus 10 minus 6, so this becomes a minus 18 squared. Now once you square it, it's not a negative number anymore anyway, so it's just 16 squared minus 16 squared, comes out the same, times 0.3. Okay, so that whole number, if I added these together, this is 39.2, this is 8, these numbers are 76.8, because remember, you're squaring a negative, so it comes out positive. So the variance is 124. Okay, I should have put a line under that. Variance is 124. So the standard deviation is just the square root of that, okay, which is 11.3. So your answers are, what's the expected value of Fund 1? The expected value is 6%. What's the standard deviation? 11.13. Remember, the variance in the standard deviation tells you how far off those values are from mu. The bigger the variance, or the bigger the standard deviation, the more risk involved in the investment. If you on average get a 6% return, then the lower the standard deviation, the more chance you're going to get that 6% return. The bigger variance or standard deviation means there's going to be a lot more variance, and there's a lot of chance that you won't get that return. And so that's what something for you'll take into consideration for the making the decisions. Okay, so now let's do Fund 2, because that was Fund number 1. And again, we go through and we figure out first what the expected return is. So it's 40% times the probability of getting 40%, which is 20%, 0.2. But they leave these in whole numbers, so 40 times 0.2, because you're just going to get it as a percent. In fair economy, 20% return, 50% probability, so 20 times 0.5. And again, this is negative, so negative 40 times 0.3, so this will be a negative number. So it's important to know it's a negative number when you're trying to figure out the total, or the average expected return, because the expected return actually in this case came out the same. It came out 6%. But now you want to find out the variance. And just look at the variance here. From 20 to negative 10 is only 30 points. From 40 to negative 40 is 80 points, an 80% swing. So you can tell there's a bigger variance just by looking at it. So remember, the variance is what the possible return is, 40 minus the expected return, 6, square it just like you do a regular variance, but you multiply times the probability. And then it's 20% minus 6% squared times the probability of 50%. And again, make sure you put that negative sign in there, because if you have this positive 40 minus 6, this becomes 34 squared. But if you have it negative, it becomes negative 46 squared, which is what you need, times 0.3. So that's what these numbers come out to. It comes out to 964. That's the variance. The standard deviation is 31.05%. And that's what they want, the standard deviation and the expected return. So in this case, they ask you which fund will you select. Well, both of them had a 6% expected return, which is good. They're tied right there. But the variance and the standard deviation are much larger on fund number 2, which means there's more risk involved in getting that 6%. So in this case, you would select fund number 1, because even though they're both 6% returns, it has less risk because it's got a lower variance and a lower standard deviation. I didn't put standard deviation on there, but it's the same thing. Okay, so that's problem number 14, page 68.